Good morning, Newport Mesa Church. We're so glad that you guys are here. Come on, let's give it up for all of our first-time guests, and we're so glad you're here today. Hey, my name is Campbell, and I am the worship pastor here. I also want to take a brief moment real quick just to say, hey, if you're jumping on Facebook Live with us, we're so glad that you're joining us today. We're jumping right back into our Crucible series, talking about defining moments. And so if you guys have the Newport Mesa Church app, you can pull that out on your phone, your device, and open up that app, and you can feel free to take your notes. We've also got notes, opportunity for you guys to take notes inside the program. You can fill those out, but I'm excited to be able to speak with you guys today, and so I want to encourage you guys to jump in with me. Let's have some fun, all right? Sound good? All right, even students, come on, man. All right, you guys ready? Let's jump in. All right, there it is. Awesome. So, hey, today as we jump back into this series, as we're talking about David. Last week, Pastor Jordan talked to us from the perspective of Eliab, David's oldest brother. And today, I want to jump back in with David. And there's some amazing things that I just love about David. I mean, so much. David is one of those characters. Of course, part of it is because of the worship aspect. I love the heart and just the character behind who David is and part of his story. And I think about David, he was such a fighter, right? I mean, this guy was willing to go down with anyone. This guy was willing to not allow certain things to disrupt him or to stop him, but he was willing to move forward. And I love David's name so much that I even named my son's middle name after David because of it. And so David, if you think about David, he faced these crucible moments. Just like every single one of us in this room, we have all had a crucible moment in our life where a situation or a circumstance or an event happens and we come face to face with having to make a decision in that moment of how we're going to live. And so just like David, we all face those. Now, I want to ask you this question today. Have you ever been told you can't? Right? Have you ever been told that you can't? Have you ever been told that you can't do this or you can't do that? Have you ever had to wrestle with something in your heart? Maybe something in your mind that kind of caused you to really kind of almost kind of just trying to figure out like, man, what's really going on? How am I going to react to this? How am I going to live in this moment? You know, I know for me personally, I've had several you can't moments in my own life where I was told you can't. And it wasn't always you can't by a particular person. I'm going to be more on the other end where it was you can't in my own head, mentally. You know, the mind games, the different things that go on. Where for me personally, I had to deal with some of those things where doubt and then insecurity began to flood my life and cripple me. Am I speaking to anybody today, right? Have you ever felt that? See, when you accept that statement of you can't, you're going to find yourself living in a place of, and with the belief that no matter what you do, you can't make a difference. You can't make a difference. And so today I want to talk about this crucible moment that David experienced. But then as we go through this, my heart and my prayer is that each and every single one of us will begin to see how it even applies to our own life. Those you can't moments that we go through. And how God used those moments to shape David so that he could respond with, I can. So today I titled my message, You Can't, But I Can. I want you to tell your neighbor today, come on, look right next to them, give it some attitude and say, you can't, but I can. Come on. Let's do that. All right, this side, this right side, come on, help me out here. Look to your neighbor and say, you can't, but I can. All right, let's pray together today. Dear God, we thank you once again for your presence that is in this room. Thank you for this opportunity to gather, to worship. Lord, I ask right now that as we get into your word, as we continue to look at the life of David, God, help us to understand and to see that even in the midst of situations and circumstances that we can respond even in our own heart with an I can. And so, Lord, speak to us today. May my words not just be my words, but may it be you speaking through me. And so, God, we give it all to you in your precious name. And everybody said, Amen. Amen. I want you to think about David again for a moment, okay? And so these past 3 weeks, we've been talking about David and talking about the different things that he has gone through. And so I would brush through this as quick as I can, right? But David, just to give you guys an idea, once again, if you're jumping into it with us for the first time, right? David was the youngest of 8 sons, and his father was Jesse. So, right, what happens? Samuel comes, he's the prophet, he comes to meet up with Jesse, and he says, hey, Jesse, I want you to bring all of your boys because I'm going to anoint one of them as a king. And what happens? Jesse takes all of his sons, gets all of his sons to line up except for one, which is David. He brings all of his sons except one, and his own dad, think about this, his own dad forgets about him. Leaves David out in the field because what happens, right? Samuel is going through, sees all the sons and says, no, this isn't the one, this isn't the person, da 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 da. And next thing you know, he asks Jesse, he's like, is this all your kids? And all of a sudden Jesse's like, oh yeah, right? My other son, my youngest son is out in the field tending to the sheep. Have you ever had a moment in your life where maybe you felt like you were overlooked? Maybe underestimated? Especially by people who should love you the most. I know I did. I can think back as a young kid, even looking back at my childhood, where at the age of 2, my real dad left, right? So I have no idea anything about my father, but I had those moments where I felt like I was overlooked. I felt like I had those moments in my own life where, man, do I even matter, right? And here's David having this moment, feeling like he was overlooked, underestimated by people who should love him most. Think about this for a moment. That's a tough day. A tough day when your own dad forgets about you. A tough day when someone who knows about you, who loves you, doesn't even think that you could even possibly be a candidate to be even king. Because he left him out in the field. See, last week we talked about this pain of rejection from the perspective of Eliab, David's oldest brother. And I want to remind us today, right, that people in life may reject us. People in life may forget about us, but I want to remind us that God doesn't pick people the way the world picks people. Think about this for a moment. All right, let's jump back in time. For some of us, jump back in time to when we were in grade school, middle school, high school, whatever it is, gym class, recess. And there came a point, right, where we get to pick teams, and we're going to play some dodgeball, or we're going to play some kickball, we're going to have a competition. What always happens, right? Well, let's get 2 team captains. And so, of course, 2 team captains come up there, and then everybody lines up in a single line, right? And then sometimes you would have some of those people who are like, well, I want them to notice me, so I'm going to be a rebel. I'm going to stand up in front, be like, yo, pick me, right? And so when you look at that line, what happens? If you were the team captain, and I love those moments because I knew that, because I was super competitive, so if I got to pick who I wanted, there was a list that I went through in my own mind. Like I looked at the line and I said, okay, I started looking at everybody because of their skill, because of their talent, how they played. And then I also thought about their track record, like were they actually really, really good? Or how many times have we won before? All of those different things. But then, of course, what happens, right? God doesn't pick people the way that we pick people. God doesn't look at us the way that sometimes we can be guilty of looking at people. See, God looks at the heart, right? Not at the facts. He's less concerned with on the outside and more concerned about what happens on the inside. God doesn't deal with our present facts or our past performance, but he looks at our potential. He looks at who we could become, and all of those different things. And so today, that's what I want to focus on. When you look at David's life and you look at all of the different events that happen even to this particular moment, we can look at David, and some of us, we can feel bad for him, right? Some of us, we know what it's like to be a sibling. We know what it's like to have brothers and sisters. For me, I was an only child, and so I could only imagine what it was like to have siblings. There were multiple times in my life growing up where I was like, I just wished for a friend, right? I wish I had somebody to play with, so I made up my own. Stop that, right? Okay. But you get what I'm saying. We can put ourselves in David's shoes. And sometimes we can feel so bad for him, we can sympathize and kind of try and feel what he was going through. But did you know that sometimes there's more to the story, right? There's more to the life of David. There's more that happens. But sometimes in life we can get so caught up about what has happened to a person, or maybe about what has happened to ourselves, that we stop ourselves dead in our tracks and we never move forward. We never move forward. Some of us, we spend so much time complaining about where we came from, we forget that there's actually a future, that there's actually something better. There's something to be learned in the seasons that you go through. There's something for each and every single one of us to learn as we go through seasons in life. You know, David was in that training for his future. David was the 8th child. If you look at the number 8 in the Bible, isn't it funny how the number 8 represents new beginnings? And that in that particular moment, as David was then anointed to be king, right? It was the season of a new beginning, the start of a new beginning. So David was anointed king, goes through this process, and it jumps into where we're coming today, where he's left the fields, following his father's wishes to bring cheesy bread, right? For those of you guys, cheese and bread, if you love Domino's cheesy bread, come on, somebody. There's nothing wrong with that. That fits into every diet in my book, I'll tell you that for sure, okay? So he was a Domino's delivery guy, man, bringing cheese and bread. Oh, so good. Let's all go that. Anita was talking about, let's go get some food. Let's do that right after service. We're going to flood Domino's and get cheesy bread. But here's the deal, right? He left the fields to go to the battlefield. And all of a sudden, he comes to this crucible moment for his life. So when I talk about this whole idea of you can't, but I can, what does the you can't sound like? What does the you can't sound like? Let me share with you several ideas of what I feel like as we look into this scripture today. You can't because of what you've done. You can't because of what you've done. Today we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 26 through 40. And I'm going to read this passage here for you, and we can just jump into it together. It says, David, who was talking to the men standing around him, asked, what's in it for the man who kills that Philistine and gets rid of his ugly blot on Israel's honor? Who does he think he is anyway, that this uncircumcised Philistine taunting the armies of God alive? Then they told him what everyone was saying about what the king would do for the man who killed the Philistine. We heard it last week, right? That the king was going to offer no taxes. Come on, that's winning right there as adults right there. No taxes, right? If you defeat Goliath, no taxes ever again. Then plus, hey, you'll get to marry my finest daughter, right? So Eliab, his oldest brother, heard David fraternizing with the men and lost his temper. And he says, what are you doing here? Catch that. Why aren't you minding your own business, tending that scrawny flock of sheep? I know what you're up to. You've come down here to see the sights, hoping for a ringside seat at the bloody battle. And then David responds, what is it with you? Replied David. All I did was ask a question. Now catch this. David was coming face to face with a you can't moment. His brother's saying, what are you doing here? Like, you can't be here, right? And we've all had those moments. Maybe we've been accused. Maybe we've been thought of in the wrong way. And I can tell you, David, he has that. And then he responds, what is it with you? Replies David. All I did was ask a question. But I love what he does here, because here's the truth. For a lot of us in this room, and I'll tell you, this is me all the way. Like, if I get accused of something, you better recognize that I'm going to come back and tell you, like, no, this is the reason why. And I will defend myself. Because that's the first thing that rises up. I'm not going to let somebody talk to me like that, right? But look at what David does. He says, dude, what is it with you, bro? Right? I mean, for most of us, we'd be like, come on, come at me, bro. Let's do it. You want to go down now? Let's take it, right? That's sibling rivalry. But David, he ignores his brother. And he turns to someone else. Dude, turn the cold shoulder. That's some confidence, right? Turning to someone else, asking the same question, and got the same answer as before. So I want us to think for a moment. A lot of times we're going to get these you can'ts because of what you've done. You know, David, he got this you can't because you're a shepherd, because you're too young, right? Because you have no experience, because you're the 8th son. What were those you can't moments for you? Because for me, I can tell you that I had those moments of you can't because of my upbringing. Growing up in a single-parent home, I had those moments where it was like, you can't be a good dad. You can't succeed. You're not going to get a college education. What do you think you're going to do, Pete? You've had no example in your own life, right? So you can't do this. You can't do that. What are those moments for you? See, some of us are here today, and even though we're sitting in this huge room full of faith, there are some of us in here today who are struggling, and we're wrestling with the you can'ts, and they're almost like private giants. Private giants in our own life. And some of us are so paralyzed, so crippled because of those giants. Maybe it could be a sickness. Maybe someone in here today, you're wrestling with a battle of cancer. And that giant has become so big in your life that now you've begun to identify yourself with the cancer rather than with who God says you are, and because of the price that Jesus paid, that you can't have victory over cancer. Maybe it's finances. Maybe it's the whole idea of trying to just catch a break. Like, you can't catch a break. You can't gain any ground. You can't make up lost time. Whatever the regret, whatever the different thing may be, what is that personal giant in your life that has caused you to be crippled, that is freezing you right in your tracks? See, the enemy today wants to tell you that you can't. The enemy today wants to tell you that you can't amount to anything. The enemy wants to tell you that you're not going to have or achieve success or have a purpose or have any vision or have something fruitful to show of your life. The enemy is going to want to drive you down into the ground to where all you feel is defeat and all you feel is weakness. And I believe that there are so many of us in this room, we want to move forward. We want to fight, but we're filled with regrets. We're filled with shame. We're filled with fear because of those you can'ts. Did you know that for those of us who call ourselves Christians, for those of us who love Jesus, did you know that we're pretty gifted sometimes at over-spiritualizing things? It's a hard truth. But some of us in this room, we've been around the sun several times. We've walked through, experienced several different things. And so sometimes we over-spiritualize things. When it comes to those crucible moments, we over-spiritualize it and we say, oh, well, I'm just waiting. Just taking my time. God's still working it out. Like, just shrugging it off, no big deal, right? I'm not saying anything like there's times and there's seasons in your life when you need to wait on God. But it's that idea of like just trying to downplay it. It's that idea of just trying to, it's no big deal, like it's cool. And a lot of times, we say things like, I'm waiting on God. And sometimes for me, I'm like, really? Because here's the truth behind that. It's like, some of us will say and we'll over-spiritualize certain things, and then all of a sudden that waiting becomes 1 year, then 5 years, then 10 years, and then 15 years? And you end up looking back and you're like, wow, you didn't realize how crippled you were, or how much that giant became so private that you didn't want to give it the time of day. See, it seems like that there's a giant in your life today that you should be fighting, but you just can't. You can't. Because of what you've done or what you haven't done, because of your past. The other you can't statement that could have come out of this is you can't because of failure. I'll tell you, one of the heartbreaking things in life for me is to see friends that I grew up with, maybe when I was a teenager and I first started going to church and I gave my life to Jesus and saw God doing things in their life. I can even think of ministry buddies when I went to Bible college, and some of these guys who had all the dreams in the world, like, this is what I'm going to do. I feel like God's called my life, and and the list goes on, and all of a sudden, they started out strong, and certain things were happening, and they were trusting God, they were giving everything, and I will tell you that as you go through life, we all know this, but life will beat you down, life will take your name, life does no respecter of persons, it just keeps going on, and one of the heartbreaking things in my life that I've seen, and I even came face to face with it myself a couple years ago, I was like, man, do I even want to keep going? But then I watched as some of my friends who I saw so much potential, so much favor, the gifting of God in their life, and all of a sudden I saw that they quit. they became crippled by fear, by their private giants. And they listened to the you can'ts, and so they didn't even try. What are some of those you can'ts in your life right now that if you were to look inside your heart, you realize, man, I haven't even tried? Because here's the truth for you, the only giants that don't fall are the ones we aren't willing to attack. The only giants that don't fall are the ones we aren't willing to attack. We try to ignore it. We try to put it in the closet to just pray that time will just wash it away and that it'll disappear. We don't want to talk about it, right? How many of you guys have ever seen, one of my favorite movies growing up was The Princess Bride? Anybody ever seen that movie? All right, there it is, right? One of my favorite characters, seriously, is Miracle Max. He only has a small little portion. But man, right, Inigo Montoya, and they bring the man, my guy in, Wesley, right, because he is mostly dead, right? They bring him in, and they're like, you need to bring him back to life. We need a miracle, right? And he's like, well, he tries to throw him off. Miracle Max tries to say, no, don't come here or whatever. And then they tell him, well, this is to get vengeance on Prince Humperdinck. And he's like, oh, and then, right, he doesn't want to hear the name. And, of course, his wife comes in. She's like, Humperdinck. Get away from me, right? He's like, Humperdinck. Some of us, it sounds so funny, but for a lot of us in this room, man, some of those private giants, we don't want to hear the name. And it's like, get it away from me. I don't want to hear it. Don't stop talking to me, right? And we go crazy. Because we're not willing to face it. We're not willing to confront it and overcome it. Because we've listened to those you can'ts. We've given in. Statements of you can't should not dictate the steps you take as a child of God. I want you to hear that. Statements of you can't should not dictate the steps we take as children of God. Because if you choose to accept Jesus into your life, if you choose to willingly accept his free gift of grace and salvation, then you are promised a gift that is beyond anything that you can compare, beyond anything that you can understand. And you'll know that because of who Jesus is, you can be also. And so our statements of you can't, our fear, all of those insecurities, all of those things should not dictate the steps that we take. Our steps should be ordered of who? God. For the steps of a righteous man are ordered by the Lord. We need to walk in confidence. We don't need to say you can't. We don't need to listen to those, but then we need to respond back with faith and say, I can. I can. The next one would be this. You can't because of death, but I can because of life. When we come face to face with those you can't moments, the fear of death comes in. The fear that, hey, this could come to an end. What we're living kind of comes face to face with reality. It's like, oh, I don't want to get close to that. But in reality, when we respond in a godly way, we're not fearful of death, but we're doing it because we're excited and joyous about life. About life. Don't live your life in such a way that you find yourself tiptoeing through it, right? To not cause up a stir, to not make a distraction or all those different things. But don't live your life in such a way, tiptoeing so much that when it comes time to death, you're like, I made it. But live your life in such a way that everything about you shows that you've lived because of who is in you. You're not fearful. See, Goliath's threats, I love this, man, right? David comes into the scene and he gets to the battlefield and he hears, man, this giant is making all of these threats. And for some of us, we would hear those threats. The army of Israel, they hear the threats of Goliath and they're fearful. They're like, oh, you can't because of death. But then David hears all of it and he's like, but I can because of life, because this isn't what God has called us for. He's looking at him, he's like, dude, you guys are the army of Israel. God is for us. Why are we giving into this fear? And it piques his interest and it intrigues David, and he begins to get curious. There's something amazing about curiosity. Did you know that when you look through the Bible and you look at throughout history, you're going to see a common theme with somebody who is curious, with somebody who is a world changer, for somebody who says, I can. Whenever someone shows up on the scene as a disruptor, typically they are young. Right? Typically they're young and they don't know any better. I heard somebody back there say, yeah, like, all right, come on, power to the, right, to youth. Typically they're young and they don't know any better. They're naive. That's what some people will say. But then they walk into these situations and they'll say things like, who says that you can't win? Who says that we can't make a difference? Who says that we can't change? Who says that it always has to be that way? Right? Who says that you can't do this? They'll question everything. Come on, teens. They'll question everything, but a lot of times when you find someone who is coming into the scene like that and making change and saying, I can, it's always because of the why. Like David knew the why because of his own experience of how God had showed himself as faithful. He knew the why of who God was. He knew the why of what was to come, of like, man, if we trust in God, God will show himself. He will bring victory. He knew the why, and that is why he was able to question. Who says you can't? Because he responded with, I think I can. I can do something about this. I can do something. See, when we look at this next part of our passage, in verse 31 through 37, I love this. David was going around asking those questions, and the things David was saying were picked up and reported to who? Saul, right? So King Saul sent for him. And David says, Master, said David, don't give up hope. I'm ready to go. You got me, right? You got me. I'm ready to go and fight this Philistine. It's almost kind of like saying, hey, put me in, coach. I got this. And Saul answered David, listen to this. You can't go and fight this Philistine. What does he tell him? You're too young and inexperienced. And he's been at this fighting business since before you were born. Come on, young buck. You think you're going to rise up to this? Dude, Goliath, he's twice your size. He's huge. You think you got this? You can't do that. Coming from who? King Saul. And then David responds and says, well, I've been a shepherd, tending sheep for my father. Whenever a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock, what does he do? I'd go after it, knock it down, and rescue the lamb. If it turned on me, I'd grab it. Straight up killer right there, right? I'd grab it by the throat, wring its neck, and kill it. Lion or bear, it made no difference. I killed it. What an I can attitude. Saul responds to him, says, you can't, you're too young. David says, oh, I can. Because of what God has already done. And then he says, and I'll do the same to this Philistine pig who is taunting the troops of God alive. God who delivered me from the teeth of the lion and the claws of the bear will deliver me from this Philistine. And then Saul said, go. God help you, right? Come on. Have you ever come face to face with somebody who maybe had that I can't attitude, and you're like, wow, what you're saying right now is crazy. Right? You're like, yeah, all right, go, have fun. Go break a leg, right? No. I mean, think about this for a moment. Sometimes it takes a young person, sometimes it takes people to ask the question. To say, who says you can't? You know, as a church, as believers, as a body of Christ, could we rise up with an I can't attitude that says, Who says you can't see God change things here in Orange County? Who says that you can't see people of all ages come to know God, to find freedom, to discover their purpose, and to make a difference? Who says? It's going to take somebody to rise up to say, well, I can. I believe it. I'll stand for this. I'll fight for this. Who says you can't see homes changed? Who says that you can't see broken marriages restored? Right? Who says that you can't see hope fill a city, hope fill a school, hope fill our area because of Jesus that lives within us? Come on, church. Who says? Like David, God didn't fill us with his power so that we could watch the battle and say, you can't. If you've experienced the love of God in your life, and you said, Jesus, it's all about you, who says you can't live your life in such a way that changes things? Who says that you can't live your life in such a way where people can be inspired because of the God who lives in you and through you? See, David is there. He's saying, here I am. Use me. God, here's my life. He's saying, I can do it. Who says you can't make a difference? David's like, I can do it. I can make one. See, anytime there's a move of God, I will tell you that there will be critics who will rise up to tell you that you can't. Anytime God has put a purpose on your life, there are going to be things that will rise up against you to tell you that you can't, to stop you in your tracks so you will stop moving forward. But I want to encourage you today, through the power of God, you can. Keep moving. Keep serving. Keep loving. See, just like David, you will have a moment. And I will stress this fact. You will have a moment. A moment to decide whether you can't or that I can. Because of who is inside of you. So not only will the you can'ts because of death, but I can because of life, but another one would be you can't is safe, but I can involves risk. Risk. See, we'll jump into the next two verses here. 1 Samuel. It says, then Saul, right, outfitted David as a soldier in armor. He put his bronze helmet on his head and belted his sword on him over the armor. And I love this. David tried to walk, but he could hardly budge. David told Saul, I can't even move with all this stuff on me. I'm not used to this. And he took it all off. When I think about this moment of David putting on Saul's armor, as Saul, they brought him to Saul, and Saul is beginning to speak to him and talk to him, right? And all of a sudden, David is putting on Saul's armor. I think of flashbacks of my son when he was little, and he was in there in my room, and he'd grab like my shirts, he'd grab my pants, he'd grab my shoes, and he would try to wear them. And it was hilarious, right? I mean, especially the times when he would try to run around, different things like that, tripping over shoes. And it's funny, those clothes, they were made to fit me. They were made to help me. Catch this. But they weren't made for my son. They're not even his size, right? Those clothes were created to fit a certain mold of certain size. He wasn't even there yet. And so David, here he is, right? He's come face to face with Saul, and they're talking, and all of a sudden Saul's like, well, hey, all right, you want to fight this giant? Go ahead. God be with you. Then he's like, here, put on my armor. Put on my armor. Put on the helmet. Put all these different things on. And David's like, I can't wear this. This isn't me. Did you know that sometimes as believers, we look at, especially in our social media and all that stuff that's going on today, because everything is so visible. You can see it on the news, online, on Facebook, on all of it. We can watch people's lives. Sometimes we look at what's going on in one person's life and we see their journey that we try to step in and say, oh, that can be mine too. Well, guess what? Your journey with God is your journey with God. My journey with God is mine. I can't cookie cutter my life. You can't live your life in such a way where you're cookie cutter it to someone else's. Your faith journey has to be yours, because there are going to be crucible moments in your life that will impact you and shape you, just like they've shaped me. So Saul's armor was made for him, not for David. And David knew that I can't work in this. And so if David would have continued to try and push on, guess what? That armor that was used to protect Saul would have become a hindrance and a crippler for David. It would have harmed him in battle. And that's the same in your life. Someone else's journey, it's not for you. Your journey has to be your journey with God. To understand that David lived his life to say, I can, to respond. He knew who he was. He knew that there was going to be a risk. But then one of the things that I found so intriguing about this passage, as David is meeting with Saul, Saul is giving advice. He's giving his armor to David for a battle he wasn't willing to fight himself. For a battle he wasn't willing to fight himself. I'm 37, and I believe in what God is doing in the lives of people. I look at college students, I look at teenagers, I look at my own kids, I look at toddlers, I look at all of that and I say, wow, the potential is there. But may we never, ever be like Saul, to where we try to teach those who are coming up underneath us or behind us and say, oh, you can do it when we can't, when we've given in to say, oh, I can't. Don't live your life in such a hypocritical way, because I will tell you, those students, those teens, those young kids, those toddlers, they're going to want somebody who is truthful, who is living it out right, who is not hypocritical, who is not two-faced, but they're genuine in who they say they are. Thought I'd get a response out of that one. Live in such a way that shows people that say, you know what? I'm not going to be overcome by fear. I'm not going to be overcome by those giants, but I'm going to face them head on. And when you think about David, and we'll get into more of it, we all know that he faces Goliath, kills the giant, saves the people of Israel. Last week we talked about how Jesus bridged the gap, how Jesus provided an opportunity for us to have new life. Because Jesus was victorious over sin, because Jesus willingly gave it his life, his victory, guess what? Becomes my victory. His victory is your victory. The victory became my victory because of who Jesus is, because of what he did. Jesus said, I can, and because of what he did, guess what? I can. There's power in that. There's power in that truth today. Because if we look at this next verse here in verse 40, and this is the last one, and I will be finished. I love this, right? David has just tried on the armor. Says this isn't for me. What does he do? David takes what he has already. He takes his shepherd's staff. He goes to the brook, selects 5 smooth stones. He puts them in his pocket of his shepherd's pack. And with his sling in his hand, what does he do? He approaches Goliath. Can I tell you today that the enemy would want everything in his power for you to give in to all of those you can'ts, to give in to all of those things? Well, you're not ready enough, you've not experienced enough, you're too young, you don't have, you want to be successful? You want to have a good home life? You want to have a great marriage? You want to have this? Like, you want to make a difference in your school? You want to make a difference in your workplace? Really? Have you looked at yourself? The enemy would want you to think all of those you can'ts and believe all of those, but can I tell you that God, just like he did with David, he has given us the opportunity and the ability because of what Jesus did to say that I can, and because we can, guess what? We have everything we already need. You are not lacking. You are not missing anything. As long as you have Jesus in your life, guess what? You've got everything you need to go and approach the giant and to kill it over your life. See, others may say you can't, but because of what Jesus did, I can. Because of what Jesus did, I can. Can we stand in this room today together? I want to give us an opportunity to respond. You know, a lot of times we respond verbally, we respond mentally, but I think something amazing happens when we actually take a physical step. When we actually step out of where we're at and say, God, you know what, this moment, it's a crucible moment. It's a special moment. This is a moment where I truly believe things will change. This is a moment where I truly believe that giants will fall. This is a moment where I truly believe that we've heard you can't see God move in our county. Well, guess what? This is a moment where I believe that God, you will make a difference. See, David took what he had in his hand. He went to a stream and he grabbed 5 smooth stones. I don't know what that giant is in your life. I don't know what that thing is that you've been trying to keep quiet. God knows. But can I tell you today that He's given you everything you need. And you can walk in victory because Jesus is victorious, you can be victorious. Amen? So let's put our hands, just stretch our hands to God today, and we'll pray this prayer together. Say, God, just repeat after me. Say, God, I thank you for loving me. I thank you for valuing my life. That you would use even this story to show me who you are. So God, right now, I ask that you help me look at the giants in my life and help me to believe that you've given me everything I need. That I don't have to respond with the you can'ts, but I can respond with I can. Because of you, Jesus. So I give my life to you. In your precious name I pray. Amen.
Hey, this is Pete from Newport Mesa Church. We want to thank you for joining us today. Here at Newport Mesa Church, we're all about changed lives. If this message encouraged you, we'd love to hear about your story. So connect with us on our webpage or email us at info@newportmesa.org. If you'd like to support the ministry here, you can give through our website or our mobile app. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week.